Oh boy, this is gonna be spicy. Because today we are diving into the latest when it comes to the Montreal Canadiens and some names in the organization that could be or that were on the move. Let's talk about a guy that has enamored NHL fans and Canadiens fans for years, and another player that we've been talking about in spurts this season. He's a pretty exciting prospect, and the Montreal Canadiens almost traded him away. Let's talk about Kirby Dach as well as Bryce Pickford. Two guys in very different spots in the Canadiens organization because they've both been talked about in the context of trades. Starting out with Kirby Dach, a guy who is 25 years old, a big dude whose contract has just come to an end. He is eligible for an extension. That's true. But the question is, does he deserve it? Kirby Dach this season had 15 points in 37 regular season games. Add to this 5 points in 19 playoff games. I'm not going to say that Dach was amazing in the playoffs, but he did redeem himself in round 1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning. He had 4 goals and 1 assist in 19 total games played, and while it's true, Dach went however many games this is without a point, he had so much momentum from the opening few games of the playoffs. He was on fire after ultimately giving Tampa Bay the victory in Game 2. Dach had a pretty unfortunate turn of events after that, because he didn't score, he wasn't as effective, and the Canadiens got totally shut down by Carolina. But that's not going to stop Renaud Lavoie from going out there and talking about the latest on Dach trade talk. Spectre's Hockey from yesterday has the scoop, so I'll leave a link in the description to this Lyle Richardson recap. But you do have Renaud Lavoie who spoke out about how the Canadiens could find a buyer for Dach if they decide to put the 25-year-old forward on the trade block. Injuries hampered Dach's development since being acquired by the Canadiens in 2022. Nevertheless, Lavoie believed that Dach still has value. He felt that teams will be interested if he becomes available, suggesting the Canadiens could get a second or a third-round pick back for him. Spectre's note goes out there and says the Canadiens likely won't get much for Kirby, but a draft pick could be used as trade chips to address other issues. One of these guys, Dach, and the other name that's talked about is Samuel Montembeault, could even be a part of a larger multiplayer deal, though that possibility seems remote. This is a really unfortunate way to talk about Kirby Dach in 2026, because if you had told fans a year ago, hey, guess what? Kirby Dach would have had a season where he actually played pretty electric hockey at some point in the playoffs, but his regular season production would have been limited. He wouldn't have played all the games, and now we are thinking about whether or not this guy could get traded again. That obviously is not the way Montreal Canadiens fans wanted to think about Dach. You just look at all the time off this guy has missed. He has not played an 82-game NHL regular season ever. And he was drafted 7 years ago. Dach had gone through pandemics and shortened seasons and injuries at the World Juniors and injuries with Montreal. I mean, he had 58 games, then 2 games, then 57 games, and then 37 games. It's been up and down, no consistency, no reliability for Kirby Dach. And I think it's also fair to say at this point, when Kirby Dach is in the lineup, he hasn't had the exposure needed to fully start developing a confident profile for himself on a game-to-game basis. It's true, Kirby Dach has played a total of 300 NHL regular season games and 28 playoff games. That's useful. That is an element to his profile that not a lot of athletes can say they have. But Kirby Dach, having all these games spread out over the course of 7 years, where some years you're playing 2 games, other years you're playing 60 plus, it just hasn't really been there for Dach development-wise. And I don't know if a lot of what needs to be happening with him and his progression is mental, or if it strictly is a physical limitation of his. But this is definitely not a player that the Montreal Canadiens would have expected to have received when they traded for him with the Chicago Blackhawks 4 years ago. He was a third overall guy, he was supposed to be a Ryan Getzlaf-like asset, and the Canadiens paid a pretty penny for him. They essentially traded Alexander Romanov for this guy. And I say that essentially because they traded away Romanov for a first-round pick, and then the pick was sent over to Chicago. It was essentially a proxy swap. But Montreal sent away a guy that is ultimately proving as a valuable defenseman in New York for Kirby Dach. And even though Dach had a few clutch goals, he hasn't really been great otherwise. So, do you agree, yes or no, with Renaud Lavoie's assessment here? Other teams could be interested in Dach, and they probably could send over a second or a third round pick to Montreal for him. Let's shift gears over onto another name in the Canadiens organization. This is a guy that actually was going to get traded, but he ultimately did not move. It's Bryce Pickford, who spent this season with the Medicine Hat Tigers in the WHL. He had 83 points and 45 goals in 55 games played. Pickford was a monster. 20-year-old right-handed defenseman, a guy drafted by Montreal in the 81st overall spot last year. Pickford provided immediate return for the Habs. Even though he was an overage draft pick, this guy quickly became the best defenseman in the CHL. And when you think about... Actually, no, should I say that? Landon DuPont is a thing. I don't know. Either way, though, Bryce Pickford ended up having a season for the ages. He scored so many goals, he was highly productive, and then Canadiens fans got all excited. Hey, this guy, he could be an option. He could potentially be a power play quarterback, maybe a number 2 power play guy behind Lane Hudson. He was one of the top scoring players in the entire WHL period. Jonas Wu, his teammate, had 3 more points than he did. So obviously, there is so much to like out of Bryce Pickford, but it turns out the Montreal Canadiens almost traded this guy away to Toronto in the Matthew Knies rumored blockbuster trade. This comes to us from Jeff Merrick, who said this on the sheet last week. Regarding the Matthew Knies rumored blockbuster, Alexander Zhuravsky, he believes Bryce Pickford, and then those 2 first-round picks. NHL Rumor Report said the significance of the quote is that it was unknown for a while who the other prospect in the trade was. Merrick believes it was Pickford. And so, when you think about it like this, you look at all the assets that rumored themselves to being in this conversation. If you have Matthew Knies going from Toronto to Montreal, and Toronto ends up receiving Zhuravsky, Pickford, and 2 firsts, I can understand if Leafs fans look at this trade return and say, wait a minute, that sucks. An overage WHL defenseman, a second-round pick from last year in Alexander Zhuravsky, and 2 first-round picks for Knies, a bona fide, proven top 6 winger who can get 60, 70, maybe 80 points in a season. I know Leafs fans wouldn't really like this trade idea. But on the other hand, you have Montreal Canadiens fans who would be looking at this and saying, wow, that is such a big package. Zhuravsky, Pickford, 2 firsts. That is a tremendous amount of stuff going over to the Maple Leafs. Thank goodness Montreal did not get that trade to go through. You have a lot of fans of either team arguing all over this Matthew Knies trade discourse, and I think that's the sign of a fair trade, isn't it? When both teams' fan bases feel like they could have gotten more or that they're giving up too much. But Bryce Pickford seems like his Montreal Canadiens career is going to survive based off of the minute that it took Brad Treliving to send that trade into the NHL. If Pickford ends up having a Hall of Fame career with Montreal, we can thank Brad Treliving for that because this guy was supposed to be a Maple Leaf. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the Kirby Dach trade idea? Whether or not he could go out there and actually get a second or a third round pick, and what are your thoughts on Pickford being the last prospect rumored in the Matthew Knies trade to Toronto? I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on, and bye.